spent a lot of time on thinking about how to go about doing that and what does it take for an individual to do research. And I spend most of my time doing research, so I'd like to give you some insights as to what I think it should be done. And some of you I know were at the presentation last year where we took one idea and expanded it into 36 different papers. This is a takeoff on that, saying, where does that one idea come from? It's hard enough, I understand what you said, you took that idea and we came up with all these different combinations, but where does the idea come from? We're going to talk about a term which for some of you may be very difficult, called creativity. How do I do something that no one else has done? When I turn in my dissertation, that dissertation has to have an element in it that says, this is the hole in the literature that I've studied. I'm filling that hole. I'm bringing that to the table. The way I refer to it with my students, it's the hook. It's like when you go fishing. You've got a hook to catch the fish on. This is the hook that you have to have, and more than likely, this has to be very creative, it has to be unique, it has to be different. It can't be, well, I'm going to do what somebody else did and I'm going to replicate it and there's my dissertation. You can't do that. So what we're going to talk about is, how do I come up with this empty box that's something new that people haven't done before? And believe it or not, I don't care, I have a friend of mine at Bonn who researches a topic that's been researched for 80 years. And the topic is happiness. Are happy workers better workers? Are happy workers less likely to leave the company? Are better workers on and on and on? And Cindy's looked at all that. And every time she says, I think I finished up on happiness, here's another part that I forgot. So she made a presentation last week, and the whole point of it was, with the room of 30 people in it, was, can anybody find a hole that isn't filled yet? And we started giving her, what about this, what about this? In the space of a half an hour, we gave her 25 new topics for her to look at that they've been looking at for 80 years. But there were holes, and it's what we've got to look at, and that's called creativity. Okay. This is kind of what I think is the byword for where we are today in the world, and that's imagination. The other term that I'll use a lot, and I've been doing a lot of research on the last 5 years, is an idea of curiosity. What is curiosity? If I find a student that I work with, a PhD student, who's not curious about how things work, I don't normally work with that person. Curiosity is the first step in saying, I want to know, I want to learn. If you're not curious about things, you're going to say, well, I'm just going through a program, I'm just taking classes, I'm just writing a dissertation. And my answer is, I'm not very interested in you. I'm interested in people that are saying, why? How come? And that's what this whole Tom Peters, do any of you, because you're young, do any of you remember who Tom Peters was? Tom Peters was a US guy, a consultant, who wrote a book, In Search of Excellence. And what it was a book on why are these companies better than all the other companies in the industry. And it was a gigantic success. Until he went back 20 years later and did an analysis of the same company, 15 of them were no longer in business. But what he was setting out to say is, why is one company better than another company? In search of excellence. The other person that I like to quote along this, because there's an awful lot of this in what I'm going to talk to you about. And it's kind of like being an artist, painting something that's really good, or writing a poem that's very good. It's very difficult to do. And Winston Churchill said, what you really have to do is keep up your enthusiasm for what you're doing. And this is why I plugged curiosity in here, because what it says is, if I lose my curiosity, I'll give up. If you're just getting a degree, you're just getting a job, you're just going back home to work, you're not going to be very successful. I can tell you that. If you're doing it because you say, I really want to know this, I really want to understand this, then the chances of you being successful are much greater. Because what you don't want to do is to look at the literature, and as many PhD students do, and say, everything that's ever needed to be written is written about this topic. And the answer is no, it hasn't. You just have to, curiosity-wise, creatively-wise, figure out how to do this. So what I'm going to do tonight is tie together imagination, curiosity, and creativity, which to me are the keys to being successful as an academic. Start by looking and saying, what's going on in the environment, what's taking place that's going to keep you from doing those things. Because just like any good educational system, we are going to try to stop you from being successful. You realize that when you come to an academic institution, they do everything they possibly can to beat creativity and imagination out of you. Do it like everybody else does it. Don't go out on there, you can't prove that. The answer is, I can't prove it now, but I might be able to prove it in the future. Let me look at it. My big problem that I have at the stage of my career that I'm in is people aren't looking at imaginative things. They're not looking at innovative things. They're looking at things that are relatively straightforward. And I think that's unfortunate. Here's what's going on in the research environment. I'll go through this pretty quickly. But what it's doing, everything I put up here is reducing the level of creativity, reducing the level of insight that we're getting into problems. And what I'm talking about here is when you send an article out to review, which I've talked to several of you tonight about it, it's taking longer and longer and longer to get back. I just got a rejection today. The paper's been out for 19 months. Okay? Now, luckily I've had other papers that I've gotten out, but I have 2 young professors that are on this paper that's a very important paper to them, and after 19 months it's been rejected. So every time you send out a paper, just think of, you're going to have a pile of these papers until people start recognizing that you're good at what you do. How do you get that pile of papers when it takes 19 months to get a review done? This is happening today. The review process on good major journals, whatever you want to call it, is running anywhere from 9 months to 2 years. Then you'll get back the paper and it'll say, we need these revisions done to the paper. I got a paper back about a month before I came over, 2 months ago. And the paper was 38 pages long. The comments that were sent back to me were 37 pages long. We want these changes, you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do that. And you can say, well, you wouldn't do it. Well, it's a very good paper, it's a very good journal. You say, well, we got to kind of figure out how to do this. Well, when we're finished writing back to the reviewers our comments, the paper will be twice as long as the original paper was. That's how detailed this stuff gets. So the second part of this is, there's an increased revision. It used to be you'd get a revision, you'd say, well, we've got to change these numbers or change the analysis. Now it's getting down to, well, I don't like this word, or I don't like this theory, or if I would have written this, I would have done this. And the revision process now is it's a life of its own. It's the old adage about, I started out designing a horse and I ended up with a camel. Because people said, well, add this on here and add that on there. And you get to the end of it, and this is a terrible thing to admit, as old as I am. I look at a paper in the journal and I go, I didn't write that. Because I forget all the changes that I had to make to get it past these review processes. The role of the reviewer has changed. When I was first starting out in the profession, it was, how can I help you to improve your research? Now it's attack. I call it cannibalistic management. I have to kill this guy and eat him up before I'm successful. I have to prove to everybody how tough I am. That's the wrong thing in a review. A review is supposed to be constructive criticism. I can constructively criticize and say, I don't think this article should be published in this journal. I don't have to personally attack you. I'm an editor of a journal, I have been for 16 years, and what I find with younger faculty members is they feel like they have to be an attack dog. I have to go for your throat. I have to tell you that it's bad, and I think that's wrong, and it'll keep you from trying risky things, because you know you're going to get beat up on. Another thing that's going is this double-blind review. Double-blind review means you don't know who I am as the author, and I don't know who you are as the reviewer. What's the problem with that? You can be as nasty as you want to be, and I've got no recourse. What happens if you don't even know what you're talking about? I can review, and I can prove this to you, I can review any article you want me to review and never read the article. There are 5 questions I can put down and say, well, what about this? Well, what about that? What about this? And you're going to go, if you don't know any better, you're going to go, well, that was really insightful. I didn't even read the article. Should there be some sort of recourse against people that do that? And I have people in the past who do it. I've been the editor of this journal for 16 years. I have a guy on the editorial review board. In fact, I mentioned him earlier, David, that mentioned it. He has never accepted an article in 16 years, not one. And I asked him finally, why do you do that, David? He said, well, if I get an article accepted in your journal, then that many less pages that I have, and I can publish an article. I said, David, that's the sickest thing I've ever heard. Now, why do I keep David on the review board? He does really good reviews. And what I'll say to a reviewer or author, I'll say, just do these 5 things that David talked about, or I don't tell him it's David, but do these 5 things, forget about the other 50 things that he told you was wrong with your paper. This is saying to you, getting things out into the public and getting known by the public is getting harder and harder and harder to do. Okay? Much harder than when I started.